The sun rose over the Afghan desert like molten gold, baking the dirt and rocks into a harsh, unrelenting landscape. Corporal Jamie Keller adjusted the straps of her medkit, feeling the weight of her body armor pressing down on her shoulders. The morning was deceptively calm, with only the faint hum of the convoy's Humvees breaking the silence. Dust spiraled lazily along the uneven road, forming tiny tornadoes that flickered across the barren terrain. Jamie wiped her forehead with a gloved hand and glanced at her squad, a mix of seasoned soldiers and fresh faces, each moving with the practiced efficiency of men and women who had seen far too much already. The men laughed lightly at a joke someone had muttered, their voices cutting through the still desert air. "Doc, don't tell me you're still adjusting your pack," one of them teased, his grin revealing missing teeth from past skirmishes. Jamie offered a faint smile, but didn't reply. She had learned long ago that words could be wasted in the field. Actions, on the other hand, could mean life or death. Sergeant Mason Holt, their platoon leader, was watching her. His sharp eyes swept across the squad like a hawk, missing nothing. The way Jamie double-checked her bandages, the way she hummed a quiet rhythm to calm her nerves, even the subtle tightening of her fists. He was a man who trusted actions over words, a career soldier who had seen too many medics freeze under fire. His voice broke through the morning hum, low and controlled, but carrying a weight that silenced the banter immediately. "When chaos hits, Keller," he said, stepping closer, boots crunching on the sand, "you move fast. Don't get frozen out there. You freeze, people die. And I don't care how shiny your metal rack looks. Hesitation gets men killed." Jamie nodded, her jaw tight, lips pressed together. She didn't need to explain herself. Holt didn't need excuses. He needed results, and she had promised herself something far deeper than medals or praise. She had promised she would never leave a fallen soldier behind, no matter the cost. Her oath wasn't just about skill or training. It was about conscience. The convoy rumbled to life, engines growling and kicking up clouds of dust that swallowed the horizon. Jamie settled into her seat in the lead Humvee, scanning the desert ahead, her gloved hands resting lightly on her medkit. Dust clung to her hair, her uniform, every inch of her skin, and she welcomed it. There was a strange comfort in the grit of the battlefield. It reminded her she was alive, she was needed, and she could make a difference. The patrol route was considered routine, or as routine as anything in this war could be. Villages dotted the landscape at irregular intervals, locals staring silently from cracked doorways or peering through broken walls. Jamie had learned to read those eyes: fear, curiosity, suspicion. In some she saw desperation, in others wariness. And always there was the constant underlying danger. Holt's voice came over the radio again, clipped and direct. "Eyes open, everyone. Stay alert. This isn't a stroll through the park." He was always the first to spot something wrong, and the last to let fear guide his men. Jamie took a deep breath, feeling the hum of tension in her chest, the electricity of anticipation she had trained for her entire career. Hours into the patrol, Jamie found herself scanning the terrain in meticulous detail. Every shadow, every mound of earth could conceal a threat. The sun climbed higher, baking the sand into a blinding white glare. She adjusted her sunglasses and rubbed her forehead. The routine chatter of the squad was comforting, a reminder they were alive, moving, functioning as a unit, but she couldn't shake a strange tension, a premonition that something today would change everything. The radio crackled again, Holt's voice steady but commanding. "We've got a clear route to the next waypoint. Maintain formation. Eyes open for anything suspicious." Jamie nodded, though he couldn't see her. She felt a nervous tremor in her hands, quickly swallowed it. She wasn't afraid. Fear had its place, but hesitation did not. And today, she would need to embody that principle completely. As they approached a narrow stretch of road flanked by jagged rocks and scattered debris. Jamie's eyes scanned the roadside with a trained intensity. Something about the pattern of the rocks, the way the dust shifted, made her stomach tighten ever so slightly. She pushed it aside. Overthinking didn't save lives. Quick, precise action did. She reviewed her procedures in her mind. Secure the wounded, stabilize injuries, communicate clearly, and never, ever retreat when someone needed her. That last rule burned in her memory more vividly than any training manual. She caught Holt's glance across the convoy, brief but piercing. There was a silent exchange, acknowledgement, warning, assessment. He had seen many medics falter, and he was watching her carefully. Jamie met his gaze without flinching. He saw determination, the kind that would not yield even in the face of terror. For a fleeting moment, the sun glinted off his dog tags, a stark reminder of the weight of responsibility they both carried. As the convoy rolled forward, the wind picked up, whipping dust into swirling patterns. Jamie adjusted her pack again, her fingers brushing over bandages and medical tools, checking them instinctively. She knew every pouch, every strap, every piece of equipment intimately. It was a part of her now, an extension of her will. She could feel the rhythm of the desert, the pulse of the patrol, the silent pressure building toward something inevitable. Somewhere deep inside, Jamie whispered a vow, unspoken, personal, powerful. I will not leave anyone behind. I will move when others hesitate. I will act when others falter. Her thoughts were interrupted only by the distant rumble of engines and the faint, nervous laughter of the men around her. Holt's words echoed in her mind. You move fast, or people die. Today, she would define what that meant, not for herself, not for recognition, but for the lives that would soon depend entirely on her courage. The desert stretched endlessly ahead, unbroken, merciless, and indifferent. But within that expanse, Jamie felt something else. The quiet, unyielding certainty that when the moment came, she would stand unmoved, unflinching, ready to risk everything for those who could not defend themselves. Somewhere over the dunes, the first warning signs were forming, invisible to anyone, but the eyes trained to see danger before it struck. And Jamie Keller was ready. The convoy rolled cautiously along the narrow dirt road, the tires crunching against loose stones and hardened sand. The Afghan sun burned overhead, and the heat shimmered like a mirage across the barren landscape. Jamie Keller adjusted her med-kit straps, her fingers brushing over bandages and emergency supplies she had packed meticulously the night before. The patrol had started routine, almost monotonous, a familiar rhythm of scanning the roadsides, watching the scattered villages, checking every shadow, every rock for signs of danger. But in war, nothing stayed routine for long. Jamie's gaze flicked from one side of the road to the other, noting the subtle details she had been trained to notice. A pile of rocks near a crumbling wall caught her attention, slightly disturbed, unevenly stacked. She squinted, assessing, calculating. Holt's voice came over the radio, crisp and commanding. Eyes open. Stay in formation. We've got about 2 clicks to the next waypoint. Jamie nodded to herself. She didn't need to answer. The radio was for the others. She preferred to move silently, observing, absorbing every detail. Minutes passed. The convoy's rhythm seemed hypnotic, almost deceptive in its calm. Jamie's heartbeat pulsed steadily, controlled, but her instincts screamed that something was off. The villagers lining the road watched from the shadows of their homes, silent, unmoving, too quiet. There were no children running alongside the Humvees. No dogs barking. Just the heat, the dust, and the stillness. In Jamie's experience, silence often preceded chaos. Suddenly, the stillness shattered. A blinding flash erupted from the roadside, followed by a thunderous roar that shook the earth and hurled the lead Humvee sideways. Dust, smoke, and debris exploded into the air, clouding the convoy in a choking haze. Soldiers screamed, some thrown violently against the walls of the vehicles, others diving for cover behind rocks and overturned Humvees. Jamie's stomach lurched as the shockwave passed over her, and instinct kicked in before fear could. She slammed the Humvee door open and hit the ground, hands flying to her med kit. Around her, the scene was chaos incarnate. A soldier's arm jutted awkwardly from the twisted metal of the vehicle, blood pooling into the sand. Others were groaning, crawling, calling out names, their faces pale and coated with dust. Jamie's ears rang from the blast, but she moved with methodical precision, her training guiding her even as adrenaline surged through every vein. She knew the rules: secure the wounded, stop the bleeding, stabilize, evacuate. And she knew she would not retreat, not while a single soldier's pulse still flickered. Her radio crackled. Holt's voice was taut with urgency. "Medic, fall back. Fall back." The words should have frozen her, but they did not. She took a deep breath, scanning the carnage. Private Daniels lay sprawled 20 yards ahead, his uniform shredded, a gash across his thigh, leaking crimson onto the dirt. Without hesitation, Jamie sprinted, ignoring the hail of bullets that tore through the air around her. Every instinct screamed danger, but she only felt the pull of responsibility. This was her battlefield, and someone needed her. She reached Daniels and fell beside him, kneeling in the sand. "Stay with me," she said firmly, voice cutting through the chaos. She ripped open her kit, pulling out tourniquets and bandages, hands moving with precise speed. Another soldier nearby screamed in pain, and Jamie cast a glance, calculating the quickest route to stabilize Daniels first. The dust burned her eyes, grit scraping her skin, and the sun's glare made it almost impossible to see. But she could feel, sense, know where the bleeding was worst. Bullets zipped past, tearing through the air, splintering rocks nearby. A piece of shrapnel grazed her arm, burning like fire, but she didn't pause. She applied pressure, adjusted bandages, and whispered reassurances to Daniels, whose eyelids fluttered. "You're doing fine," she said, teeth gritted, adrenaline propelling her movements. Holt's voice barked again through the radio. "Medic, you need to retreat." Now, she ignored it. Retreat would mean leaving Daniels. And leaving Daniels was not an option. From the ridge above, Holt watched, his stomach tight. His medic, the one he had quietly doubted, was refusing orders, crawling toward imminent danger to save a life. His jaw tightened, anger and admiration warring inside him. He knew then that Keller's refusal to retreat was not defiance in the reckless sense. It was courage, the kind that demanded respect. He had to act. If she stayed there alone, bullets would cut through her just as easily as they might cut through Daniels. Jamie worked tirelessly, ignoring every instinct to duck or flinch. She tore strips of cloth to make additional pressure dressings, applied a makeshift tourniquet, and murmured calming words to Daniels, trying to stabilize his breathing. The battlefield around her was a symphony of chaos. Explosions, gunfire, screaming, shouts of her squad coordinating. Dust clung to her hair, sweat and blood, making her movements sluggish, but she pressed on, focusing entirely on the wounded soldier in front of her. Other soldiers hesitated, unsure if they should follow orders or help. Then, one by one, they found their courage in her defiance. Inspired by her composure, they advanced toward the fray, providing covering fire, dragging the less critically wounded to safer positions. Jamie's presence had become the anchor in the storm, a single point of focus that restored a sense of order amidst chaos. Daniels groaned, eyes flickering open slightly, and she muttered, "Hang in there. I've got you." Holt's boots pounded the dirt as he broke from cover, moving straight into the kill zone. His squad shouted at him, but he ignored them, determination burning in his eyes. He reached Jamie just as a round tore up the ground beside them. Without hesitation, he laid down suppressive fire with one hand, while grabbing Daniels with the other. "Move," he barked, dragging them toward a safer position. Jamie protested briefly. "Leave me. Save him." But Holt's grip was firm. "You're coming with us. Nobody gets left behind." Together, they crawled across open terrain, bullets whizzing past, dust blinding their eyes. Jamie applied pressure to Daniel's wounds as Holt returned fire, each movement coordinated instinctively, without hesitation. The squad rallied behind them, emboldened by the courage displayed by their medic and sergeant. What started as a scene of panic transformed into a disciplined, fierce counter-assault, driven not just by orders, but by the undeniable force of determination and loyalty. By the time they reached partial cover near a ruined wall, Jamie's uniform was torn, bloodied and caked with dirt, but her hands were steady. Daniel's breathing stabilized slightly under her care. Holt dropped beside her, chest heaving, eyes wide with disbelief. "You didn't run," he said, almost in awe. Jamie shook her head, sweat and grime streaked across her face. "I couldn't," she replied simply. "Not when he was still alive." Around them, the battlefield continued to rage. But in that small, desperate pocket of survival, a spark of hope had taken hold, one that would change the course of the day, and the way every soldier saw her from that moment forward. The first minutes of the ambush had passed, but Jamie knew the battle was far from over. Yet she had already proven something essential. Courage wasn't about blind obedience or self-preservation. It was about standing when others ran, risking everything for the lives that mattered. And the desert, merciless and indifferent, had just begun testing her resolve. The dust hung thick in the air, swirling around Jamie Keller's face as she knelt beside Private Daniels. Her gloves were soaked with blood, her uniform torn in multiple places, and the sun overhead beat down mercilessly. All around her, chaos raged, the sharp crack of gunfire, the explosion of distant IEDs, soldiers shouting names and commands. Smoke stung her eyes. The acrid scent of burning fuel and earth filled her nostrils, but none of it slowed her. Her hands moved with precision, tearing open dressings, applying tourniquets, murmuring calm words, as if the world itself depended on her composure. The radio crackled again, Holt's voice sharp with frustration. "Medic, you need to fall back, now." Every instinct in her body told her to obey. Every training drill, every survival rule drilled into her during endless exercises screamed that she was overexposed, a target in open terrain. But she refused. She couldn't leave Daniels. She couldn't abandon a soldier whose life was dangling by a thread. In that moment, fear existed only for the soldiers who couldn't yet find courage. Jamie's only priority was him. She adjusted the tourniquet on Daniel's thigh, gritting her teeth as the fabric bit into her gloved hands. His breathing was shallow, ragged, but present. "You're going to be okay," she whispered, though even she wasn't certain it was true. She kept her head low, shielding him with her own body, praying she could stabilize him long enough for help to arrive. Her mind raced with calculations, how to keep pressure on the wound, how to protect herself and Daniels simultaneously, how to signal for assistance without exposing their position further. Every second was a gamble. Above, Holt observed, a storm of disbelief and admiration in his eyes. His medic, the one he had quietly doubted, was refusing orders, deliberately, intentionally, to save another. And she wasn't frozen in panic. She was methodical, precise, calm under fire. Holt's military mind instantly recognized the significance. Keller's courage wasn't reckless. It was calculated, honed by training, reinforced by conscience. But it was also dangerously exposed. He clenched his fists. Every soldier he had ever led knew the rules. You follow orders, or lives are lost. But sometimes, the rules weren't enough. Jamie's eyes flicked up, catching movement on the ridge. Bullets ripped past, tearing up dirt beside her, splintering the rocks she used for cover. Sweat and blood mixed into the grit, coating her face, stinging her eyes, but she pressed on. She could hear the screams of men behind her, the roar of vengeance, the hum of chaos surrounding her position. But none of it distracted her from the life under her hands. Daniels groaned, his eyelids fluttering as she applied a second dressing, adjusting pressure to stop internal bleeding. Her mind ran through every emergency drill she had memorized. Rotate pressure, monitor breathing, check pulse, maintain consciousness. She worked with fluid precision, ignoring the heat, the smoke, the bullets. Holt's voice cracked through her radio once more, thick with anger and concern. "Keller, I'm ordering you to retreat." "Now." She ignored it. The words fell on deaf ears, buried beneath the pounding of her heartbeat and the singular focus on saving Daniels. Retreat was unthinkable. He was alive, and he would remain so if she refused to leave. From the ridge, Holt made his decision. He couldn't just watch. Her courage, defiance, and competence forced his hand. Holt rose from his cover and broke into the open, sprinting toward her position, ignoring the hail of enemy fire. The squad watched in stunned silence, some shouting, others frozen. Holt's single-minded determination was a gamble, a reckless violation of field protocol, but he knew that Keller's bravery deserved action, not inaction. As he reached her side, bullets snapped past, kicking up sparks of dirt and gravel around them. "Move!" Holt barked, grabbing Daniels and lifting him partially off the ground. Jamie's hands instinctively moved to support the wounded soldier. "Leave me," she yelled, straining against his grip. "I can stabilize him." Holt shook his head fiercely, jaw set. "You're coming with me. Nobody gets left behind." His voice carried authority, born of both experience and sheer necessity. Jamie glanced at Daniels, who was fading in and out, and realized he couldn't survive alone. She allowed herself to be pulled upward, supporting Daniels' weight as Holt covered their retreat with suppressive fire. The open terrain stretched endlessly, barren and unforgiving. Dust whipped around them, stinging their eyes, mingling with sweat and blood. Each step forward was measured, each movement a calculated risk. Holt's arm provided cover, while Jamie's hands ensured Daniels remained stable, pressure applied to critical wounds. They moved in perfect synchrony, instinct guiding each decision. Around them, the rest of the squad had rallied. Inspired by Keller's refusal to retreat, soldiers advanced, taking calculated positions, providing covering fire, and dragging injured comrades to safety. Jamie's mind focused on Daniels. "Stay with me," she murmured, glancing at his pale, sweat-streaked face. "Just hold on. I'm not leaving you." Every second stretched into an eternity. Every step a battle of nerve and determination. Her body screamed in protest, muscle fatigue, burns from the sun, stinging cuts from shrapnel, but she ignored the pain. She had trained for this, yes, but more importantly, she had made a choice, to act, to stay, to save, no matter the cost. The battlefield was a maelstrom, but Keller and Holt formed an unspoken alliance. Holt's presence allowed her to focus entirely on Daniels, while he returned fire, suppressing the enemy's aim. It was a dangerous choreography, balancing survival with aid, risk with necessity. Each movement required precision, coordination, and trust. Every step forward increased exposure, but also increased the odds of survival. Keller's calm under fire became a focal point, an anchor for the others. Minutes felt like hours. Jamie applied a final bandage to Daniel's leg, checked his airway, monitored his pulse. The bleeding had slowed, and his breathing had stabilized slightly. She allowed herself a brief glance at Holt. His expression was a mixture of awe and relief, his face streaked with sweat and dust. "You didn't run," he said quietly, almost in disbelief. Jamie shook her head, voice steady despite exhaustion. "I couldn't. He's not gone yet. And I don't leave anyone behind." Around them, the squad had regained composure. The enemy, surprised by the defiance and courage displayed, began to retreat under the coordinated fire of Holt's men. The chaos of the ambush transformed into a controlled extraction, guided by discipline, bravery, and the unyielding spirit of a medic who refused to run. Jamie's actions had not only saved Daniels, but had inspired her entire platoon, giving them the courage to move when fear had paralyzed them. For Jamie, the battlefield's noise faded into the background. Her focus remained on the pulse beneath her hands, on the life she had refused to abandon. In that moment, she understood something profound. Courage wasn't about following orders blindly, nor about avoiding danger. It was about standing firm when everyone else faltered, about risking everything to preserve the lives that still depended on you. She was a medic, yes, but she was also a lifeline, a force of determination in a sea of chaos. And in that unrelenting Afghan desert, Jamie Keller had proven that courage could not be measured by obedience alone. It could only be measured by action, by refusing to abandon those who needed her most. Holt, observing, knew it too. The refusal to run had transformed a single medic into the heartbeat of their entire squad, a symbol of defiance, determination, and the unbreakable bond between soldiers on the field. The desert air was thick with smoke and dust, the acrid scent of burning vehicles mixing with the copper tang of blood. Jamie Keller knelt over Daniels, her hands steady despite the chaos around her. Bullets tore into the ground and metal near her, kicking up shards of rock and sand. Every second was a test, every movement a gamble. She had refused to leave, and now she was dangerously exposed in the open, a single human shield for a critically wounded soldier. Her breathing was controlled, every exhale a whisper of determination. From the ridge, Sergeant Mason Holt assessed the scene. His squad had started to regroup, emboldened by Keller's bravery, but he knew the situation was critical. She couldn't hold Daniels alone forever, and if he remained under fire, they both would be casualties. Holt's jaw tightened as he weighed the risks, violating protocol, exposing himself, facing almost certain gunfire, but Keller's courage demanded action. He rose, boots crunching against the sand, and sprinted forward without hesitation, leaving his men frozen in stunned silence. The bullets zipped past him, tearing into the ground, kicking up sparks of stone and sand. Holt's body moved with the trained precision of a seasoned soldier. Each step was calculated, each movement measured to minimize exposure, while closing the distance between himself and the medic. The squad watched, breath caught in their throats, as their sergeant defied convention, running into the fire that could have easily killed him. "You're insane," one of them yelled. Holt didn't answer. He had made his choice. Jamie's eyes flicked up just as Holt reached her. Relief, surprise, and disbelief flickered across her face. "Sergeant, you shouldn't," she began, but Holt cut her off, gritting his teeth. "I'm not leaving the one person who refused to abandon someone alive," he growled. With one arm, he provided suppressive fire, returning shots toward the enemy, while with the other, he grabbed Daniel's injured body. Jamie's hands instinctively moved to support the soldier, stabilizing him as Holt pulled them toward cover. The coordination between medic and sergeant was seamless, almost instinctual, as bullets tore past them. Dust and sand whipped into their faces as they crawled toward a low wall that offered partial shelter. Holt's suppressive fire forced enemy combatants to duck or retreat, allowing Jamie to continue her critical work. She applied pressure to Daniel's wounds, rotated bandages, and adjusted the tourniquet as Holt kept firing. His breaths were deep, controlled, but his eyes were sharp, scanning for threats, calculating trajectories, predicting enemy movements. Together, they moved like a single unit, balancing offense and defense, care and combat, risk and precision. The battlefield was a maelstrom of chaos. Humvees overturned, sand and shrapnel kicked into the air, the screams of men punctuating the crack of gunfire. Other soldiers, inspired by Holt's bold action and Keller's refusal to leave, began advancing again. One by one, they moved forward with purpose, providing covering fire, dragging the wounded to safer positions. Keller's courage had become contagious, a beacon in the storm that galvanized the squad. The ambush had shifted from panic to controlled retaliation. Jamie's mind was laser-focused on Daniel's. Every movement counted. "Stay with me," she whispered, adjusting his bandages once more, checking his pulse. Holt's arm protected her, firing bursts to suppress enemy fire. Their synergy was undeniable. It was no longer a simple rescue. It was a calculated ballet of survival and defiance. Each second stretched like an eternity, every step forward a confrontation with mortality. And yet, neither of them faltered. The wall ahead was battered and scarred, but it offered temporary cover. Holt dragged Daniels into the narrow space, and Jamie crouched beside him, still holding pressure on the wounds. Around them, the squad had secured better positions, firing at enemy combatants and signaling for medevac. Jamie's breathing was heavy, sweat dripping from her forehead, blood caking her gloves. Holt glanced at her, eyes wide with respect and awe. "You're insane," he muttered quietly, but there was admiration behind the words. Jamie shook her head, grimacing through exhaustion. "No," she replied. "We're alive because we don't quit." The enemy, surprised by the combined defiance of medic and sergeant, began to falter. They moved cautiously, retreating into cover as Holt's squad advanced with renewed coordination. The initial ambush, meant to overwhelm and scatter, was losing its grip. Jamie rotated her pressure on Daniel's wounds again, checking his breathing. It was shallow but steady. For the first time since the blast, hope began to thread through her exhaustion. Holt didn't stop. Bullets shredded the air around him, kicking up sparks from rocks and splintering fragments of the wall they were near. His body moved with purpose, a balance of offense and protection, every step synchronized with Jamie's movements. He barked commands to the squad, repositioning soldiers to provide maximum coverage while ensuring Daniels remained safe. The synergy of leadership and courage, of experience and bravery, transformed what had been a desperate fight into a tactical counterstrike. Jamie felt the weight of the moment. Every wound she treated, every movement she made, could mean the difference between life and death. She whispered calm words to Daniels, urging him to focus, to stay with her. Holt fired in bursts, pushing back enemy fire, buying precious seconds. They were moving as one, a triad of survival. Keller, Daniels, Holt. Each heartbeat was measured, every breath a testament to discipline and courage under fire. Finally, the worst of the immediate danger passed. They reached a partially destroyed Humvee, using it as a shield. Jamie adjusted Daniel's bandages one last time, securing the tourniquet and checking his airway. Holt, still alert, kept firing sporadically, suppressing any last pockets of enemy combatants. The squad began regrouping, inspired by the display of bravery, rallying behind Keller and Holt. What had started as chaos had transformed into a structured, controlled extraction. Jamie allowed herself a brief glance at Holt, who was panting, covered in dust and blood, his uniform torn. "You're incredible," he said softly. She shook her head, a small, tired smile crossing her face. "We're not done yet," she replied, returning her focus to Daniels. Around them, The desert hummed with tension, but a spark of hope had been lit. Courage, determination, and unbreakable resolve had shifted the tide. The sun beat down relentlessly, but Jamie's focus remained unshaken. Daniel's pulse was steady, her hands unyielding. Holt's presence beside her ensured that no threat would breach their fragile safety. The ambush, though still dangerous, had been contained through sheer courage and unwavering determination. In the heart of the desert, under fire, in the midst of chaos, a medic and a sergeant had proven that bravery in action could defy even the most terrifying circumstances. For Jamie, the lesson was clear. Courage wasn't just about standing. Still, it was about refusing to run, even when survival seemed impossible. Holt had demonstrated the same principle in action. Together, they had rewritten the rules of the battlefield, showing that loyalty, skill, and courage could turn desperation into triumph. And as they waited for the medevac to arrive, the desert seemed to pause, acknowledging the defiance and determination that had refused to yield. The desert air was thick with dust, the sun a merciless overseer over the battlefield. Jamie Keller crouched beside Private Daniels, her hands pressed firmly on the tourniquet she had applied moments earlier. Every second mattered. One misstep, one delayed heartbeat, could mean the difference between life and death. Sweat and blood coated her gloves, clinging to her skin, stinging her eyes, but she didn't flinch. Daniel's shallow breathing was a fragile thread she held tightly in her hands, and she refused to let go. The roar of the battlefield surrounded her, bullets snapping past, distant explosions, and men shouting names, orders, and warnings. Holt stayed beside her, his body a shield as he fired bursts at the advancing enemy. The sound of his rifle cracked the tense air, each shot buying precious seconds for Jamie to stabilize Daniels. Their movements were synchronized, almost instinctively. Every action was calculated, every decision precise. Holt's eyes scanned constantly, calculating threats, reading the terrain, predicting enemy movements, while Jamie's focus remained on the fragile life in her hands. Around them, the squad had regained coordination, emboldened by the courage displayed by their leaders. Jamie's voice was calm, a steady anchor in the chaos. "Hold on, Daniels. I've got you," she whispered, rotating her hands to maintain pressure on his wound. The burn in her arms from exertion and blood did not deter her. Fatigue did not exist in this moment. Every heartbeat counted, and she was determined to ensure his heartbeat continued. Holt's presence beside her was both reassuring and inspiring. He gritted his teeth, firing without pause, covering her as she worked. Together, they were a single unit against an overwhelming enemy force. The enemy, momentarily disoriented by the defiance and skill of Keller and Holt, began to falter. Their fire became less coordinated, more sporadic. The squad capitalized immediately, repositioning to provide covering fire and drag other wounded soldiers into safer positions. Jamie glanced briefly at the men, seeing the shift in morale. Fear replaced by determination, hesitation replaced by courage. Her own resolve intensified. She had become more than a medic. She was a catalyst, a lifeline, the heartbeat of the platoon in the chaos. Time stretched, seconds feeling like hours as Jamie worked tirelessly. She tore strips of cloth to reinforce Daniel's dressings, adjusted pressure, and monitored his pulse and breathing. Each adjustment was critical. One slip, one distraction, could undo all the careful work she had done. She muttered instructions softly to Daniels, urging him to remain conscious, to focus on her voice. "Breathe with me," she instructed gently, counting silently in her mind to keep him present. The desert heat and gunfire seemed to fade, leaving only her, Daniels, and the fragile rhythm of life she was fighting to preserve. Holt's voice broke through her concentration, though it was less urgent now, more controlled. "Jamie, keep him stable. Medics are inbound. Just a little longer. She nodded without a word, eyes locked on Daniels. She didn't trust words. She trusted action. Every movement Holt made was precise, covering angles, suppressing fire, buying her the time she desperately needed. Together, they formed a bubble of survival in the heart of chaos, a tiny bastion against the storm of gunfire and explosions. The squad worked in tandem, dragging soldiers to cover, providing protective fire, and communicating in shouts and gestures. Jamie caught Holt's eye briefly. "We've got this," he said, his tone a rare mixture of respect and exhaustion. She allowed herself a small nod. The medevac had been called, but until it arrived, every second they could stabilize Daniels, every second they could control the field, mattered. The desert seemed to hold its breath, waiting, as bullets ripped through the dirt around them. Jamie rotated Daniels' legs carefully, checking for additional wounds, adjusting pressure where necessary. Holt fired in short, controlled bursts, forcing enemy soldiers to duck or retreat. Jamie's focus never wavered, her hands steady even as exhaustion pressed against her from all sides. The noise, the heat, the smoke, the screams, none of it mattered. Only Daniel's pulse mattered. Only ensuring his survival mattered. The battlefield around them existed in a haze of danger, but within it, a fragile rhythm of life persisted. Minutes dragged on, but the medevac chopper finally appeared, its rotors slicing through the dust and heat. Jamie felt a surge of relief, but the danger was far from over. Holt and the squad coordinated, securing the landing zone and providing covering fire as the helicopter descended. Jamie stabilized Daniels as two medics from the chopper rushed forward, taking over her care with professional precision. She guided them through his injuries, detailing every step she had taken, ensuring continuity. Holt remained vigilant, scanning the area for threats until the last possible moment. Jamie allowed herself a brief glance at him, seeing his exhausted, bloodied face, eyes wide with respect. "We did it," she whispered, not to him, but to herself. The weight of the adrenaline, the fear, and the responsibility pressed down on her, but she had held the line. Daniels was alive, breathing steadily, evacuated to safety. The medevac lifted off, carrying him away, leaving behind the chaos, slowly fading into the desert haze. The squad began to regroup, their morale bolstered by the courage displayed by their medic and sergeant. Jamie finally allowed herself a moment to breathe, checking her own injuries, minor cuts and burns, bruises and scrapes, but nothing life-threatening. Holt placed a hand on her shoulder, a rare gesture of acknowledgement. "You didn't just save Daniels," he said quietly, voice filled with emotion. "You saved us all. You gave us hope when we thought we were done." Jamie shook her head, trying to shrug off the praise. "I did what I had to do," she said simply. The desert wind whipped past, dust swirling around them, but the moment felt almost sacred. In the heart of chaos, in the unrelenting Afghan heat, she had acted not out of obedience, not out of protocol, but out of pure determination to save life. It was a lesson in courage, in loyalty, and in the refusal to abandon those who depended on her. As the squad moved back to safer ground, Jamie took a final glance at the battlefield. The Humvees were damaged, scorched earth marked the site of explosions, and the dust still hung thick in the air. But amidst the destruction, life had endured. Daniel's survival was proof. Holt's admiration, the squad's renewed determination, and the quiet sense of purpose that enveloped her were equally proof. Jamie Keller had faced the storm and refused to run. The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the desert, but Jamie's resolve remained unshaken. Every heartbeat, every breath, every action she had taken had mattered. The medevac carried Daniels to safety, but the true victory lay in the courage displayed, the lives preserved, and the message sent. Bravery was not measured in obedience alone, but in action when it mattered most. And as Jamie stood among the dust, blood, and scorched earth, she realized that the battle had been won not just for Daniels, but for the soul of her squad, a testament to the unyielding power of courage and the refusal to abandon those who needed her most. Days had passed since the ambush, but the adrenaline still hummed faintly beneath Jamie Keller's skin. She sat in the stark, air-conditioned room at the base, the hum of the fluorescent lights above mingling with the low murmur of officers consulting reports. Her arm was bandaged, and her uniform, though cleaned, bore the subtle signs of battle. The scars of the desert, dust, blood, sweat, remained in her memory, vivid and unrelenting. Outside, life carried on at the base, the mundane routine of military logistics, a stark contrast to the chaos she had survived. A group of officers entered, their faces neutral but stern, notebooks and digital tablets in hand. The command board had convened an inquiry, an investigation into Jamie's actions during the ambush. Charges had been drafted: exposure to hostile fire, disobedience, and refusal to follow direct orders. They didn't know her, hadn't seen her in action, and perhaps didn't understand the reasoning behind every decision she had made. Jamie didn't flinch. She had acted according to a higher principle, and her conscience bore no guilt. The senior officer, a colonel with sharp eyes and graying hair, addressed her first. "Corporal Keller, your actions on the 12th were unconventional. You disregarded direct orders from your commanding officer and exposed yourself to unnecessary risk. Can you explain why you did not fall back as ordered?" His tone was professional, but edged with incredulity, the weight of protocol pressing heavily on the room. Jamie took a deep breath. She understood that obedience was central to the military structure, that insubordination was treated seriously. Yet she had a truth to tell. Calmly, clearly, she recounted the sequence of events, describing the injuries, the immediate threats, and the choices she had made to stabilize Daniels under fire. She described the terror, the chaos, the split-second calculations, and above all, the determination not to leave a soldier behind. Every word was precise, professional, and factual. She did not embellish. She did not plead. She did not ask for understanding, only presented the facts. She knew that facts alone could demonstrate the courage and necessity of her actions. "I could not leave him," she said plainly, her voice steady. "Every second he was unattended increased the risk of death. I weighed the dangers and chose to act in the only way that would save him. Retreat was not an option. Survival for one cannot come at the expense of another." There was a pause. The room was silent, except for the faint rustle of papers. The officers exchanged glances. Jamie could feel the tension, the weight of protocol versus reality pressing down on her. She met the colonel's gaze, unwavering, knowing that the truth she spoke carried more weight than fear, more weight than regulations. Her actions were auditable, measurable, and undeniable. Yet the question remained: would adherence to protocol or moral courage prevail? Holt entered without ceremony, his boots echoing in the chamber. He strode to the front and slammed a thick report onto the table, drawing the attention of every officer. "Colonel," he said, voice low but unwavering, "I was there. I saw everything." Corporal Keller's actions were not just justified, they were the reason Daniels survived. Her refusal to retreat saved lives, not just his. She acted with courage, precision, and authority. You can debate protocol, but the facts are clear. Without her, we would have lost 2 soldiers that day. The room was stunned. Holt, always measured, had never spoken with this intensity before. His presence carried weight. He was a respected leader with years of experience and a track record of battlefield excellence. His words were not hyperbole. They were evidence, testimony, and a defense that no one could dismiss lightly. The colonel leaned back slightly, considering the rigid lines of authority softened by the undeniable truth of Holt's account. Jamie listened quietly, arms crossed, waiting for judgment, but feeling a strange sense of vindication. She had done her duty. She had made a choice, and it had been the right one. The room seemed to shift as the gravity of her actions and the undeniable outcome settled into perspective. The officers consulted in low voices, muttering assessments, reviewing reports, and cross-referencing battlefield communications. All evidence pointed to the same conclusion. Keller's courage had saved Daniels, maintained morale, and inspired the squad to act. Finally, the colonel's gaze returned to Jamie. "Corporal Keller," he said slowly, "your actions defied orders, yes, but they were precise, measured, and undeniably effective. By refusing to retreat, you stabilized a wounded soldier, maintained unit cohesion, and arguably prevented further casualties. The charges, in light of this evidence, are dismissed. You will be recognized for your bravery." The words hung in the air, a mixture of relief and astonishment. Jamie allowed herself a small exhale, tension easing from her shoulders. Holt remained beside her, a quiet smile tugging at his lips. He handed her a folded piece of paper. The official commendation, yet unspoken, was his personal acknowledgement. "Guess refusing to run has its perks," he said quietly, and for the first time in days, Jamie allowed herself a brief smile. The formalities of the military, the rigid structure of protocol, had been temporarily overshadowed by the undeniable truth of courage. The inquiry board dismissed, Jamie walked out into the bright sunlight, Holt by her side. The desert beyond the base seemed different, softer, somehow less oppressive, though the memory of the ambush lingered. Soldiers greeted her with quiet nods, a new respect in their eyes. The battlefield had tested her, the inquiry had questioned her, but her resolve remained unshaken. She had acted according to principle, and principle had prevailed. Later, in the privacy of her quarters, Jamie reflected on the events. She carefully unpacked her med kit, checking supplies, cleaning instruments, and reviewing procedures. The physical scars of battle, scrapes, bruises, and burns, would heal, but the mental imprint, the lessons learned, and the courage displayed would remain. She wrote in her field notebook, a ritual she maintained even in peace. Courage is not obeying orders blindly. Courage is standing when everyone else hesitates. Courage is refusing to leave those who need you most. Holt entered quietly, standing in the doorway. "You've set a standard today," he said, voice measured, eyes filled with pride. "Not just for the medics, but for everyone in this unit. They'll talk about this for years." Jamie nodded silently. Recognition mattered little to her. What mattered was the knowledge that she had acted when it counted, had upheld her oath, and had preserved life. That night, the desert wind carried a quiet sense of closure. The base, normally humming with activity, seemed to rest, the tension of the previous days dissipating. Jamie sat by the window, looking out at the vast, unbroken horizon, reflecting on the duality of war, its chaos and its clarity. The ambush had been brutal, unforgiving, and relentless, but it had revealed something profound. Courage could defy orders, and moral conviction could outweigh fear. The inquiry had been more than a review of actions. It had been a test of principle, judgment, and the very essence of bravery. Jamie had faced it without flinching, guided by an unwavering moral compass. Holt's support had been instrumental, a reminder that leadership was not just about command, but about recognition, trust, and the willingness to back those who acted with integrity. As she closed her notebook and prepared for sleep, Jamie felt a quiet sense of peace. Daniels had survived, the squad had endured, and she had acted in accordance with everything she believed in. The inquiry, once a looming shadow of judgment, had become a testament to the truth. Courage cannot be measured in obedience alone. It is measured in action, in integrity, and in the refusal to abandon those who depend on you. And in the quiet of her room, Jamie Keller knew she had passed the ultimate test, not just of protocol, but of character, courage, and the unwavering spirit of a medic who refused to run. The morning sun rose over the base, bathing the desert in a golden glow that made the sand shimmer like molten metal. Jamie Keller stood at attention, her uniform crisp, her posture rigid yet composed. The courtyard was filled with soldiers, officers, and staff, all gathered for the award ceremony. The hum of quiet conversation, the shuffle of boots, and the distant clatter of helicopters created a rhythmic backdrop to the solemnity of the moment. Today was not just another day at the base. Today was a recognition of courage, integrity, and an unwavering refusal to abandon life. Holt stood beside her, a silent pillar of support. His presence was both comforting and grounding. He had seen her actions up close, understood the risks she had taken, and had fought alongside her both literally and figuratively. Today he would witness her recognition, and in some ways he felt a personal pride that went beyond words. The squad had gathered, their expressions ranging from awe to quiet respect. Many still recalled the ambush vividly, the chaos, the fear, the split-second decisions that had saved lives. Jamie's actions had become the defining story of the day. The commanding officer stepped forward, a small, polished case in hand. "Corporal Keller," he began, voice echoing across the courtyard, "you have demonstrated extraordinary courage and selflessness under fire. Your actions during the ambush on the 12th saved lives, inspired your fellow soldiers, and exemplified the highest standards of service. For your bravery, you are awarded the Medal of Valor." A hush fell over the assembled crowd. Jamie's heart pounded in her chest, not from fear, but from a mixture of disbelief and solemn recognition. She had never sought recognition. Her actions had been instinctual, guided by principle rather than expectation. Yet, as the officer opened the case and lifted the gleaming metal, a tangible weight of honor settled into the air. Holt's hand lightly rested on her shoulder, a subtle but firm acknowledgement that said more than words could convey. "You earned this." Jamie stepped forward, keeping her composure as the medal was pinned to her chest. The cool metal pressed against her uniform, a symbol of courage, sacrifice, and survival. Around her, the soldiers clapped, some shouting her name, others offering quiet nods of respect. The air was thick with admiration and reverence. In that moment, she felt the full weight of what had transpired, the terror of the ambush, the danger, the adrenaline, and the relentless responsibility of holding a life in her hands. As the ceremony concluded, Jamie's thoughts drifted back to the battlefield. She remembered the blast, the dust, the screaming, and the intensity of every decision she had made. Each moment was a vivid memory, etched into her mind with stark clarity. She recalled Daniel's shallow breathing, the sweat on his brow, and the small, fleeting flickers of consciousness that gave her the chance to save him. The memory of the decision to refuse orders, to remain despite risk, was both haunting and empowering. Holt led her to the side of the courtyard, away from the formalities. "You've changed how people see courage," he said quietly. "Not just here, not just in this unit, but everywhere word of this spreads. You didn't just save a life. You reminded everyone what it means to act with integrity under fire." Jamie nodded, absorbing his words, but remaining humble. Recognition was not the goal. Survival and duty had been her focus. Yet she felt a deep sense of responsibility, not only to Daniels, but to every soldier who might one day face a similar choice. Later, Jamie walked among her squad, shaking hands, exchanging nods, and receiving quiet congratulations. Their respect felt profound, earned not through authority or rank, but through shared experience, courage and integrity. She noticed the subtle differences in how they looked at her, a mixture of awe, gratitude, and inspiration. Many whispered stories of the ambush, retelling her courage, cementing her actions into the collective memory of the unit. Jamie listened, a quiet smile tugging at her lips, but she never exaggerated, never sought attention. The focus remained on the principle, courage in action, regardless of recognition. Back in her quarters that evening, Jamie carefully hung the medal on a small shelf, next to photographs of the squad and mementos of previous deployments. The medal gleamed under the soft light, a tangible reminder of the battle, of Daniels, and of the choices that defined her. She picked up her field notebook, flipping to the page where she had written, "Courage is not obeying orders blindly. Courage is standing when others hesitate. Courage is refusing to leave those who need you most." She traced the words with her fingers, feeling the weight of truth and experience behind them. A knock at the door drew her attention. Holt entered, quietly, carrying a cup of coffee. "Thought you could use this," he said, setting it on the small desk beside her. He lingered, eyes thoughtful, gaze lingering on the medal. "I've seen a lot in my career, Jamie," he said softly. "But what you did, it's something else. It's the kind of thing that stays with people. You've set a standard that will echo here for years." Jamie looked at him, tired but resolute. "I just did what I had to," she replied. Holt shook his head. "It's more than that. You led, protected, inspired, all in the same moment. Don't underestimate what that means." Jamie leaned back, sipping the coffee he had brought. The warmth contrasted sharply with the harsh desert memories, but it grounded her. She thought of Daniels, of the squad, and of the countless moments where courage had to outweigh fear. She understood that heroism was not a single act, but a series of choices, a continuous refusal to abandon principle, even when survival was uncertain. The medal was recognition, yes, but it was also a reminder, a call to uphold that standard every day. Sleep came eventually, though not easily. Dreams of the ambush flickered in her mind. Dust clouds, explosions, and Daniel's shallow breathing. Yet there was also a sense of calm, a quiet satisfaction that she had acted with integrity and bravery. In her dreams, she saw the squad rallying, Holt's steady presence, and the bond forged through courage and survival. The medal rested nearby, glinting in the moonlight, a silent witness to the story of that day. Morning brought a sense of routine, but Jamie's perspective had shifted. The battlefield was no longer an abstract concept. It was a reality she had faced, survived, and learned from. She prepared her gear, checked her medkit, and reviewed procedures with meticulous care. Every action carried the weight of experience, every choice informed by the lessons of courage under fire. The medal on her chest served not as decoration, but as a reminder of the responsibility that came with the role she had embraced fully. As she stepped outside, Holt fell into stride beside her. The base stretched out, bathed in early sunlight, soldiers moving with purpose. "Ready for the next challenge?" he asked, voice light but edged with seriousness. Jamie nodded. "Always," she replied. She felt a renewed sense of duty, an understanding that courage was continuous, not limited to a single moment of recognition. The medal was a memory, yes, but also a call to future action, a promise to herself, to her squad, and to every life she might one day be responsible for. And as Jamie walked through the base, medal gleaming, sun reflecting off the sand and metal, she realized that heroism was not defined by accolades alone. It was defined by choice, by action, by courage under fire, and by the unwavering refusal to abandon those who depended on you. Today, she had been recognized, but the real victory lay in the lives preserved, the lessons learned, and the quiet strength that would guide her through every challenge yet to come. The desert sun had long dipped below the horizon, leaving the base bathed in the cool, muted glow of twilight. Jamie Keller stood on the ridge overlooking the training ground, the wind carrying the scent of dust, sand, and the faint tang of spent gunpowder from earlier drills. It was quiet now, deceptively peaceful, a stark contrast to the chaos that had erupted weeks before during the ambush. She felt the weight of the past events settling over her, not as a burden, but as a testament to the choices she had made and the lives she had helped preserve. The metal gleamed faintly on her uniform, its polished surface reflecting the fading light. It had become more than a symbol of recognition. It was a reminder of responsibility, courage, and the thin line between life and death. Each time she looked at it, she remembered Daniel's shallow breathing, the tourniquet that had stabilized him, and the calculated risks she had taken in the heart of open fire. The memory of Holt covering her, firing relentlessly while she focused entirely on saving life, remained vivid, a perfect embodiment of trust, teamwork, and shared courage. Jamie's thoughts drifted to the squad, each soldier who had witnessed the ambush and the defiance she had displayed. Their respect had shifted something fundamental in the unit's culture. Fear had been replaced by determination, hesitation replaced by initiative. Soldiers who had once acted only on orders now began to recognize the power of action guided by conscience and skill. Keller had become a living example of what it meant to act with courage, to prioritize life, and to inspire others by example rather than command. Even now, months later, the story of the ambush circulated quietly among new recruits and seasoned soldiers alike. Holt made sure of it. He recounted the events in training sessions, emphasizing precision, courage, and the moral courage it took to act in defiance of protocol when lives depended on it. Jamie's actions became a benchmark, not just of medical skill, but of leadership, integrity, and the resilience required to survive in combat. Young soldiers would hear her story, absorb the lessons, and carry them forward into their own service. Despite the recognition, Jamie remained humble. She often returned to the training ground alone, med kit in hand, reviewing procedures and drills. The medal did not make her a hero in her eyes. Her actions had been instinctual, driven by principle rather than expectation. She focused instead on mastery of her craft, on preparedness, on ensuring that if another crisis arose, she would be ready. The ambush had taught her the value of preparation, observation, and decisiveness under pressure, lessons she intended to apply every day. One evening, Holt joined her on the ridge. He leaned against the railing beside her, his silhouette outlined against the rising moon. "You've left a mark here," he said quietly, voice reflective. "Not just on the squad, but on me, on every soldier who's seen what courage really looks like. You've set a standard we'll never forget." Jamie nodded, a faint smile brushing her lips. "It's not just me," she said. "It's all of us. Every soldier who acts with integrity, who makes the choice to protect life, is part of this. We all carry the legacy forward." The legacy was evident in subtle ways. The squad worked more cohesively. Their trust in one another deepened by shared experiences and mutual respect. Jamie noticed soldiers anticipating each other's movements, providing cover without instruction, and taking initiative in critical moments. It was a culture shift born from courage, a reminder that leadership could be demonstrated through example, not just rank. Holt's influence as a sergeant, combined with Jamie's steadfast bravery, had created an environment where moral courage was as valued as obedience. Jamie often thought about Daniels, who had returned home after recovery. She had written to him several times, each letter a mix of medical advice, encouragement, and gentle reminders about courage under pressure. He had survived, yes, but he had also carried the lessons of vulnerability, trust, and the life-saving power of steadfast action. Jamie realized that legacy was not measured solely in medals or ceremonies, but in the lives touched, the skills imparted, and the inspiration left behind. In quieter moments, Jamie reflected on the ambush itself. She recalled the fear, the uncertainty, and the razor-edge decisions she had made. Each memory carried weight, yet also clarity. She had refused to run, had prioritized life over protocol, and had acted with precision under fire. That choice had defined her, not as a soldier seeking glory, but as a medic fulfilling the highest oath of service. She understood that courage often came with risk, that integrity sometimes required defiance, and that the true measure of heroism lay in unwavering commitment to life, even when the odds were grim. The base was alive with activity, soldiers preparing for exercises, maintaining equipment, and tending to routines. Jamie watched them, feeling a quiet pride. She had faced the worst of combat, survived, and learned lessons that extended beyond the battlefield. Her legacy was now intertwined with theirs, a constant reminder that courage, decisiveness, and moral clarity could tip the balance in moments of chaos. She knew that long after her deployment ended, the principles she had lived by would continue to resonate within the unit. As night fell and the stars emerged over the desert horizon, Jamie Keller stood on the ridge, the cool wind brushing against her face. She thought about the past, the ambush, the lives saved, and the recognition she had received. She thought about Holt, the squad, and Daniels. She realized that heroism was not a single act, but a continuum of choices, each guided by conscience, courage, and commitment. And in that quiet moment, surrounded by the vast, unbroken desert, she understood that her actions had created a ripple, a legacy that would endure far beyond the sands of that battlefield. Jamie took a deep breath, feeling the desert wind fill her lungs, grounding her in the present while carrying the weight of memory and honor. The medal at her chest reflected the starlight, but it was more than a symbol. It was a reminder that bravery was born of choice, that leadership was born of example, and that life, above all, was worth protecting. The legacy of the ambush, of the refusal to run, and of the unwavering courage displayed was etched not just in medals or reports, but in hearts, minds, and the very culture of those she had inspired. She turned back toward the base, ready to continue her duties, to train, to mentor, and to live by the principles that had carried her through the storm. The desert was quiet now, but the lessons, the courage, and the spirit of action would echo across time. A reminder to every soldier that bravery was not simply surviving, it was acting with integrity, with purpose, and with unwavering resolve. Jamie Keller's legacy had been forged in fire, and it would endure, a beacon for all who followed.